All right. We are ready to go, Erin.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks everybody for joining us here today. We're going to start out with a little bit of housekeeping and then do introductions as well here. So as Liz mentioned, we are recording the webinar. We'll make that available after today. And we'll also include the slide deck and additional information as necessary. We'll send that out to folks as soon as possible. Just a reminder to please turn off your cameras and mute your microphones. The chat is disabled for the webinar, but we do have the Q&A function available on WebEx. So please feel free to utilize that as we go through the presentation today. If you have questions and we can get to those. We will pause throughout the webinar to answer questions. And if for some reason we're running out of time today, we will be able to send you information to contact us with questions that we might have not have gotten to. So we'll make sure that we're answering folks' questions as we move along today. We'll start with introductions, and I'll give it back to Liz here.
All right, I'm Liz Bosnick, and I work for the Department of Children, Youth, and Families in our Child Safety and Permanency Administration, and I'm part of the QRTP operations team at DCYF. I recognize several attendees. Part of my role with the QRTP stuff is every week I'm conducting quality assurance case reviews for children and youth that are currently placed in QRTPs and reaching out to counties and tribes just to look at whether there's any QRTP requirements that need updating in SSIS. So like I said, I recognize lots of folks here and I'm so glad you're attending with us.
Hi there, my name is Mary Lamprecht. I am the contract manager for the state contracted qualified individuals.
And good afternoon again, folks. My name is Erin Kintup. I'm the QRTP assessment representative at DCYF. So probably have worked with quite a few of you through our email address and in working through QI requests. So glad you're all here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nicole Needham. I'm a child welfare subject matter expert in the SSIS Business Ops team.
Hi, I'm Erica Peterson. I am also a child welfare subject matter expert in the SSIS Business Operations team.
All right, well, we will jump in here. We're going to sort of start high level. And really our purpose today is talk about the requirements, processes, documentation, and best practices for placement of children and youth in foster care into QRTPs, or Qualified Residential Treatment Programs. As we go through the requirements and the processes, we'll also sort of switch to talking about how to document those activities into SSIS, or a social service information system for agencies. So as we get started, as we know, we all live in kind of a world of acronyms. So just wanted to touch on a few of those as we get started. As I mentioned, Family First Prevention Services Act, or FFPSA, folks are probably familiar with, you'll hear a lot. As we mentioned, DCYF, the Minnesota Department of Youth, Children, and Families. We'll also talk about EPRs, or extended placement reviews, qualified individuals, or QIs, and then again, QRTPs, qualified residential treatment programs. So wanted to get folks a little bit acquainted with the acronyms before we jump in and utilize some of those. So let's talk a little bit about FFPSA, or the Family First Prevention Service Act. So FFPSA became law in February of 2018, and it modified sections of federal child welfare laws. One of those was to broaden services and prevent out-of-home placement. One was to encourage the least restrictive setting to meet a youth's needs while in placement, and in turn limit the use of group residential and congregate care settings, children's residential facilities, foster residence settings, and corporate foster homes. As we mentioned today, we'll be focusing on the residential and congregate care requirements of FFPSA. As part of that, again, as I mentioned, FFPSA works to limit the use of group residential or congregate care settings. So that includes certification requirements and Title IV-E approval of processes and certain placements within those settings. It requires additional requirements for placing agencies, which we'll be going over today in detail. And it requires an assessment to determine which placement setting is the least restrictive, most appropriate for a child or youth. And again, you'll hear that from us quite a bit, least restrictive, most appropriate. And in Minnesota, FFPSA requirements began to apply for all residential placements as of September 30th, 2021. So we've been implemented for a while, but there's quite a few pieces to this process. So wanting to make sure that we have the most information, update information and best practices available for folks. So as part of the Family First Prevention Services Act, certain specialized settings were created for residential or congregate care settings. QRTP, or Qualified Residential Treatment Program, is one of those. Again, we'll be focusing on that today. It also created additional specialized settings, such as settings for pregnant or parenting youth, PPY, programs for youth or children who have been at risk or have been sex trafficked or commercially sexually exploited, also known as STY, and then supervised independent living settings for youth in extended foster care, or SILS. And all of these certifications and settings can become certified through DHS licensing, who continues to monitor the certifications. And these certifications are in addition to existing licensing requirements. So again, as I mentioned today, for the purposes of our webinar, we'll be focusing on the QRTP Qualified Residential Treatment Program requirements. So what are QRTP facilities? These facilities are mainly for children or youth who require treatment for severe emotional or behavioral disturbances or disorders, developmental disabilities or related conditions. In Minnesota, only DHS or DOC licensed children residential facilities or child foster resident settings or corporate foster homes can be QRTP certified. And there are certain things that QRTP certified facilities are required to do. One of those is be licensed and accredited. They also are required to use a trauma-informed treatment model, have registered or licensed nursing and clinic staff available 24/7. And they facilitate and provide outreach and participation for children and youth in their treatments, and also provide discharge planning and aftercare services and supports. So a little bit about when FFPSA applies and how that relates to placement decisions. FFPSA applies to children and youth in foster care. This could include a placement, having placement authority through a court order or a voluntary placement agreement. In addition, Indian Child Welfare Act, or ICWA, or MITFA, Minnesota Indian Child Welfare Act requirements continue to apply. And it's really vital for case managers to know if a program is certified as FSPSA or another specialized setting prior to the placement of a youth. Because again, as we talk about, there are specific requirements for QRTP placements. So it's important to know which program or facility you're placing in and what their certification is. So how do you know if a facility is QRTP? What we encourage agencies to do is to utilize licensing information lookup to search for a facility if you're unsure of its status and if it's QRTP certified. So there's some different ways to search on here. We've just put some screenshots up here of your ability to search by children residential facility, and then you can specifically select QRTP. I think most folks are familiar with licensing information lookup, so you can search by provider a bunch of different ways. But that's really the most updated information about a facility or their program and if it is QRTP certified. And just a little bit more on that, if you do go to a specific facility, you'll notice this specialized setting certification we have here highlighted in the bottom, and that would indicate QRTP. So we encourage folks as you're looking to utilize licensing information lookup to identify that information. And certainly if there are questions, we'll have our email address throughout this webinar, but also available to answer questions for folks as well. But licensing information lookup is really going to be your best spot to find that information. Just a quick note of out-of-state QRTP placements. It is the agency's responsibility to confirm if a facility is QRTP certified when placing out of state. So that information will not be on licensing information lookup. So agencies will need to connect with facilities when placing out of state to determine if they are QRTP or not. If they are, obviously ICPC or Interstate Compact for the Placement of Children agreement needs to be completed for out-of-state placements. The other pieces included here would be the financial operations QRTP checklist should be completed and submitted by the county. Again, we have links to all these documents. And if you have questions specific to out-of-state placements, we did link the email address here for our partners in the ICPC area as well. This is our first section to pause for questions. Again, that was sort of high-level overview of FFPSA, what a QRTP is, how to identify one. And we'll see if we have questions and then move on to the next section.
Hi, Erin, it's Liz. No direct questions related to the content that you just covered. We've had a couple questions about the PowerPoint being sent out. This webinar is being recorded, and so the webinar recording and the slide deck will be posted in the coming weeks on the Child Foster Care Partner Link page, which is the same place where you registered for this webinar. We will attempt to email out this information to those that registered for this webinar. However, we had over 500 people register, and it's likely that we're going to hit some limits, and so we may not be able to get that email out. So the best bet will be to check that Partner Link Child Foster Care page to find both the slide deck and the webinar recording once those are posted.
Thanks, Liz. And if folks have been following along with us, we've had sort of a series of webinars this summer and fall. And so the information will be posted in that same location if you visit us there. All right, we'll move on here to the first pieces in the process. One of the things we wanted to highlight is if folks aren't familiar, we do have a QRTP flowchart. This is linked within our PowerPoint, but it's really sort of a nice snapshot and goes through step by step of sort of the process when placing a youth in a QRTP certified facility. So we'll be following this document and we'll use snapshots of it as we move forward. And certainly, as I think folks know, for an agency to be able to claim Title IV for the placements, these requirements need to be updated in SSIS. And on our flow chart, you'll notice sort of little hyperlinks in these green oval areas. Those are all links to SSIS resources about how to enter certain steps as you move through the flow chart. And as I had said earlier, we will go through sort of a step in the policy and requirements and then pause, and we'll have SSIS talk a little bit about how to enter that information in the system to meet those requirements. So let's jump in with the first step. You have a youth, you've identified that they might need some additional support, treatment. And so first step is going to be to convene a juvenile treatment screening team, or JTST, another acronym. That's really going to be the place to sort of kick off this process when you're looking at placements in a QRTP certified facility. Juvenile treatment screening teams determine the appropriateness of the placement options for youth. It ensures members of the team are available and able to attend to speak to the needs of the youth, and also serves to prepare parents, custodians, or guardians for a screening. And it follows up after the screening determination. So the JTST is a really important group of folks to look and review what's going on with the youth and decide if a QRTP or other placement setting would be most appropriate for them. We do have a whole practice guide on juvenile treatment screening teams. So if you're interested, we've linked that in the PowerPoint as well. It talks about, when to convene a meeting, as we talked a little bit about here, team members, and those sorts of things. So really comprehensive document there about juvenile treatment screening teams. So I'm going to pause now after that first step of convening the JTST, and we'll talk about how we document that in our SSIS system.
Okay, thanks, Erin. So to enter a juvenile treatment screening team into SSIS, you'll want to navigate over to the juvenile treatment screening team folder, which is underneath the permanency folder. So it's a subfolder underneath that, and you will find that under the person node. So once you're at the JTST folder, you'll access the action menu and select new juvenile treatment screening team. I just want to note that on all of our SSIS slides, is a hyperlink to the job aid. So for this one, there is a detailed job aid on the worker documentation page that is specific to data entry for JTST. I strongly encourage you all to look at the worker documentation page. It has a lot of good resources, especially for each of these separate QRTP pieces. So once you've selected the new juvenile treatment screening team from the action menu, you will need to be sure that all fields in the grid are answered. I would like to note that this does require workers to scroll to the right in the participants grid to ensure that all of those required fields are completed. If information from this screen is missing, it will impact other QRTP screens as this information is pulled into some of those other screens. As a general SSIS overview, clicking on those blue hyperlinks will pull up on-screen guidance for filling out the screens that you're on. And I think that's all that I have for the JTST piece, so I'll pop it back over to you, Erin.
Thanks, Erica. Okay, so moving on to the next step, you've convened your JTST, they approve placement in a QRTP, you've entered into SSIS. And so the next steps would be to request a qualified individual, or QI, to complete a QRTP assessment and to assemble a family and permanency team. So first we'll talk a little bit about family and permanency teams and some best practices related to that. One of the tips that we like to provide folks is to assemble your family and permanency team as soon as possible after the JTST approves a QRTP placement. And oftentimes it's nice to chat with the JTST about who might be a good member of that family and permanency team. So let's talk about that. Who might be a good member of the family and permanency team? You really want a diverse group of members who can speak to the child's needs and strengths. That could be any biological family that it's appropriate for the youth to have as part of the team, guardians, prior placement providers, clergy, teachers, coaches. Youth over 14 can recommend someone for the team as well. So there's quite a few ways to really kind of create a robust team. And it's important that you do have folks who are able to speak to those strengths and needs, because they will be interviewed by the qualified individual as part of their assessment. So super important to have them engaged. They will also stay engaged in the process after the assessment is completed to really assist and support the youth and the entire team in ensuring that the youth has what they need as they move forward. Again, just like with the JTST, we do have a practice guide specifically about family and permanency teams. Again, it talks about, the purpose, who would be, good members of that team, etc. So encourage you to check that out as well. In addition, as you're approaching family and team members about this, we do have a resource which we've linked to later in our presentation that is a guide for families specifically about QRTPs. So that might be something that's useful for folks as you're talking with them about the family and permanency team process. Now I'm going to pause and have SSIS again talk about entering the family and permanency team into the system.
Thanks, Erin. So to access the family and permanency team folder, again, you'll navigate to the QRTP documentation folder, which is located under the permanency folder. You'll select QRTP family and permanency team, and then the action menu to select new QRTP family and permanency team. Again, there is a detailed job aid on the worker documentation page with step-by-step directions on data entry for this specific piece. So once again, all fields on this screen must be completed in full. If there are any fields missing, there will be data cleanup errors that you'll get. The QRTP placement field will list all placements that qualify as a QRTP placement with that potential specialized setting certification. The open or current placement should be the one that's selected. This field is required to be completed prior to saving. The associated work group field will autofill, but workers can still choose from the multi-column dropdown if the appropriate work group does not autofill. This field is also required to be completed prior to saving. Next is the date the team is assembled, and the workers are required to manually choose the date that the team was assembled into this field. And then the next field is the ICWA field, and this will pull from the ICWA record. You are able to select the appropriate ICWA record from the dropdown. Again, the 4 fields that I just discussed are all fields that are required to be completed prior to saving. And the remaining questions must be answered as well to avoid data cleanup errors, but you can save just after those first 4 fields are completed. To add new participants, to add them to the family and permanency team, you will select new team participants from the action menu. Clients in the work group will already be listed in the team participant drop-down menu, and workers can search their county database to add existing clients. They can create new collaterals or add existing professional collaterals by selecting one of those options from the action menu. When adding clients or collaterals this way, those individuals will only be affiliated with this family and permanency team and not the entire work group when you're adding it from the action menu while in the family and permanency team. Okay, if a relative search has been completed and documented in the relative search folder in SSIS, there is an additional option to add relatives to that folder, from that folder. To do this, you'll click on the action menu again from the QRTP family and permanency team and choose add relatives from relative search. Once the relative is chosen, they will appear as team participants in the family and permanency team. Once the clients and collaterals are added to the family and permanency team, you will then choose the team participant from the drop-down menu on the screen. and select their role from the drop-down menu, and then select yes or no to indicate if that participant is a member of the family and permanency team. The contact information for team participants is pulled in from the address, phone, email, state detail folder on the person node. To add another participant, you'll click new team participant from the action menu, and you'll just repeat those steps until all of the team members are added. Once the family and permanency team meets, a contact activity must be created in SSIS so it can be linked to the family and permanency team screen. So to do this, you will create a contact activity using the date and time of the meeting. You'll select the appropriate work group, and then you'll select QRTP family and permanency team meeting from the activity drop-down menu. Okay, and lastly, once that contact activity is entered, you will navigate back to the family and permanency team screen, and you'll select add existing contact link from the action menu. From there, you'll select the correct activity and click OK. To be sure that the contact is linked appropriately, make sure that you expand the date team is assembled folder from the tree view. To verify that it is linked, and it'll show up right under that date team assembled if it's linked appropriately.
Thanks again, Erica. All right, so jumping back to next steps within the process, again, we've had the JTST, they're recommending QRTP. You've assembled your family and permanency team, you've got all that entered, and then document can be sent from SSIS directly to the QI as they're working on their assessment. And so that's the next step, is really to begin working on getting that QRTP assessment done by a qualified individual. Mary's going to talk a little bit later about how to access a QI and the documents to provide them. But right here, we wanted to talk a little bit about the requirements for the assessment. So a qualified individual completes the QRTP assessment prior to or within 30 days of a child or youth being placed in a facility. So that's an important timeline to keep in mind if you know of a placement date, because you want to make sure you're within that 30-day timeline in getting that assessment completed from the date that they were placed in that facility. As part of the assessment, a qualified individual will be utilizing the Minnesota Brave Child and Adolescent Strengths and Needs Assessment, or the CANS, to complete an assessment. CANS is an age-appropriate, evidence-based, validated functional assessment tool approved by the commissioner for the use in QRTP assessments. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the purpose of the QI and the QRTP assessment is to determine the least restrictive and most appropriate setting to meet the youth's needs. The QI's placement recommendation and determination is made through completing the CANS and engaging that family and permanency team throughout that process, which is why I mentioned before, it's really important to have that robust team that can talk about the strengths and the needs of the child, potentially short and long-term goals for the youth, so that they can really make a comprehensive recommendation as part of their assessment process. And now we'll talk a little bit about entering the QRTP assessment into SSIS.
All right, so to complete the QRTP assessment referral form, you will need to select the documents folder, which is found under the person node, and then go to the action menu and select new document. Once you get to the new document menu, you will need to select QRTP assessment referral form. This form will need to be completed and then sent to the QI. All right. Prior to entering the QRTP assessment and recommendations, workers should add the QI as a collateral to the work group. Next, the worker will need to go to the permanency folder under the person node, expand, and find the QRTP documentation folder. Then click on the QRTP assessments and choose New QRTP assessment. So when you're entering the QRTP assessment and recommendations, please remember that all questions have to be answered. If the date recommended for placement in QRTP by screening team field is unable to be filled out, go back and check to make sure the juvenile treatment screening team is completed. Click on the help text link for screen guidance when needed, the blue hyperlinks. All right, so workers will select appropriate answers from the drop-down menu. The qualified individual's assessment and recommendation report must be attached in the child's attached files folder, which is under the person node. Be sure to select the correct document type, which is qualified individual's assessment and recommendations report. A new field labeled placement preference of parents/legal custodians/Indian custodian has been added in preparation for QI documentation enhancements coming in a future release to QRTP assessments. Please be aware that if this screen is not completed in full before saving, you will get an error requiring the assessment to be deleted and workers will have to start over. This is a current known defect that we are currently working on.
Thanks, Nicole. And we'll pause for questions. Go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, we got a lot here. Okay, first question. And Aaron, Erica, Nicole, if we don't know the answer, just let me know and I will give the email address of where folks can send that email to get their answer. So first question. We were told in the past, don't request the qualified individual or QI until you have a placement saying they would take the youth. Is that still the guidance from DCYF and DHS?
So typically when we receive a request for a QI, and again, we haven't kind of talked about that just yet in the presentation, we'll get there. But we do like to just verify that information, mostly to make sure we're meeting that 30-day timeline, right? So we do like to verify that information. We certainly acknowledge that at times you're going to be looking for a placement option or waiting on a placement date. You know, these kids, have a lot going on and trying to secure placement and some of those sorts of things. So we really like to be communicative with agencies about those timelines. You also don't, one of the things we caution folks from doing is completing an assessment too far in advance. So if you're thinking about a QRTP placement, but it's not for 6-7 months, that's going to be a little bit too early to get that assessment done because it's not going to speak to their immediate needs. So I don't think that there's a hard and fast rule about, how close to the placement you should request. But it's something we like to stay in communication with agencies about so that the assessment is completed as close to that placement as possible, but also meeting the timelines. Liz or Mary, would you add anything to that?
No, I think you covered it.
Agreed.
All right, next question. Are you saying there needs to be 2 separate group meetings? One for the juvenile treatment screening team and another for the family and permanency team?
You're going to want to have a formal meeting with your juvenile treatment screening team, right? And that group of folks is going to look different from the family and permanency team. So typically you're not going to hold those meetings simultaneously. Really, the juvenile treatment screening team meeting should come prior to assembling the family and permanency team. And it's great to meet with your family and permanency team and communicate that with them and what their role will be. But a formal meeting isn't necessarily required. You need to assemble, inform, ensure they know what their role is as part of that family and permanency team. But convening a juvenile treatment screening team is going to look different from that family and permanency team if you choose to hold that via meeting and assembling those. it's really going to be focused on two different pieces, and you'll want that JTST approval prior to then assembling the team. I hope that helps clarify.
Next question. Do we add new members after the child is in a QRTP placement at any time or only at the time of the screening team meeting? I think the question is asking about adding new members to the family and permanency team.
You can add members of the permanency team throughout the course of the placement. I think, you know, that team is going to be there to support the child as they move through their residential placement. And if new people come up that you think that you think should be on the team, yes, add them. They're going to be an important part of this process.
Next question. This might be SSIS specific. Will it cause any errors if team participants aren't listed in SSIS?
That's
My
a good
understanding
question.
is yes, but
Yeah.
I'll default to Erica and Nicole.
Yep, I do think that it will. However, I don't have an answer as to what errors those may be. So some of that question could be sent to the help desk and it can be forwarded on to the SMEs and we can look at it a little bit more closely.
Perfect. I'll put the help desk email in there. Thank you, Erica.
And I would just mention too, Liz, because that list is coming from SSIS to the QI, you're going to want to have all the folks on there, right? Because if you're missing folks, I mean, and it'll be some email communication and some of that stuff back and forth. If there's team members that, you know, you're sending from SSIS but aren't listed on there. So yeah, best practice would be to get them included on there before you send that information.
If team members are no longer a part of the current team, do they get deleted? I believe that question is specific to the family and permanency team.
You mean deleted on SSIS for the record, Liz? Is that?
Yes, I believe that's the question. Can they get deleted if they're no longer part of the current team?
So I think from a systems perspective, I would say they can be removed from the system, but I think that would be more maybe a policy call if that's best practice, or if any person that was part of the family and permanency team should continue to be entered in the system.
Yeah, I don't know if we've ever had a question like that come through. So what I might do on that one is just put an email in there so you can get some more clarifying information on that one. So next question. The child may not be in a QRTP placement at the time of the family and permanency team meeting. So a continuous placement entry will not exist yet. Is it is it acceptable to add this information in at a later time rather than real time?
So I believe that you would need to add it in at a later time because though the placement and the placement field on the family and permanency team is required in order to save that screen. So if there is no placement, you wouldn't be able to save the screen.
All right. Is an ROI or a release of information needed to be signed by the parent for the QI to talk with the members of the family and permanency team?
No, it is not required. Their QIs are considered child welfare professionals for the purposes of completing these assessments. So releases of information are not required.
Do QIs have access to SSIS?
No, they do not.
In an emergency situation, can you have the juvenile treatment screening team and the family and permanency team at the same time?
I mean, logistically, there's a lot of meetings and a lot of things going on, right? And certainly understands, the desire to want to kind of combine those things. I would say it would be very important that folks know their role and what team what team that they are on. Certainly parents, guardians might be on both teams, and you can have those conversations. Typically, what we see with the family and permanency teams is it's not so professional based. I mean, there are some therapists and things like that. But again, the purpose of that team is different than the juvenile treatment screening team. So I would just be very clear with folks when you're meeting with them, what their role is and what team they're sitting on. I don't think there would be anything that would preclude you from doing that, but I think it's sometimes family and permanency team members have questions about their role or who's contacting me, like the QI. So just best practice, we would encourage you to make sure folks are clear about what their roles and the expectation is, being part of one or both of those teams.
All right, then we had just a comment from some of the SSIS leadership that are attending. They asked that before you email the help desk, that you connect with your SSIS mentor. They may be able to answer your questions. And then if not, the mentor can work with you to contact the help desk. So going forward, I'll make sure to mention that whenever I'm giving out the help desk email. All right, I'm just looking through a couple of these. There's a couple questions that we are going to get to later on. Another person said, every qualified individual I have worked with has asked for a release of information. And so they have made sort of a general release of information just for this reason. So that's more, I'm just sharing that with Erin and Mary, some feedback that we're getting.
Yeah, thank you for that. As Erin mentioned earlier, it's not required for for releases of information to be signed. I know that there's some, therapists or other professionals that are really hesitant to speak, even if they know that they're not required. They just rather would have that ROI in place. We have been sharing with the state contracted QIs that, they don't need that ROI. And I know that we've shared that with the larger group of QIs, but, depending on who you have, you could educate them, but it's not required, but it's not going to hurt if you have one.
All right, and then the last one, just kind of a clarifying comment. Some QIs may have access to SSIS, but are told not to use it for this purpose. Is that correct? And I'll just add, there are some QIs who might work for a county and thus have access to SSIS. But correct, in their qualified individual role, they do not access SSIS. They have no reason to access SSIS to complete any of their QRTP or qualified individual duties. And Mary, please jump in
Yeah.
on that.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right, Liz. They should not be accessing SSIS at all during their QI assessment. That is not part of their QI role. So thank you for that clarification.
And I would just add that, what we encourage and expect of QIs is that they're really engaging with that family and permanency team to gather the appropriate information to complete their CANS assessment. There's only 3 required documents that caseworkers need to send to a QI as part of the assessment process. And part of that is we don't want them going through a bunch of paperwork as part of their assessment process. We really want them to engage with those professionals and that family and permanency team to be able to gather the information that they need. So that's part of one of the reasons why they're not in SSIS.
All right, I think that covers all of the questions for this section for now.
Excellent. Thanks, Liz. Good questions. Thank you, guys. Okay, we're going to move on to the next piece of the flow chart. And so again, just to kind of recap, we've done our JTST recommending QRTP. We have had the family and permanency team assembled. They're aware of their role. They've connected with the qualified individual to complete the assessment and gather the information. And then the qualified individual sends you the recommendation. So there's a few different options depending on where the youth is currently placed and what the QI would recommend. First would be a QI recommends placement at a QRTP certified facility. So the child or the youth may be placed or continue to be placed in that placement if they're already there. If a QI does not recommend placement in a QRTP certified and the child is already placed at that facility, a child or youth must be moved within 30 days. And then the third option here, if a QI does not recommend placement at a QRTP certified and the child is not yet placed there, then the agency would need to follow the QI placement recommendation. I know that gets a little confusing depending on the recommendation in the youth, but just wanted to kind of line it out there for folks regarding those recommendations. And then I will hand it over to SSIS to talk about entering that information.
All right. As part of the updates to how SSIS determines QRTP placements, there's been an important change in how QRTP certification is identified. Previously, the system calculated potential QRTP eligibility based on the combination of the placement setting and placement reason. That logic is no longer used. Now, when entering a placement into SSIS, workers will see a new question on the placement screen. Is the BizOrg/provider certified to provide QRTP services? It's important to understand that this question must be answered anytime the following 2 conditions are true. The first condition is that the placement setting is either a residential program or a group home staff operated. And the second condition is the placement reason is one of these 6, which are corrections, evaluation, shelter, treatment for chemical dependency, treatment for severe emotional disturbance, or treatment and services for developmental disabilities. If the answer to these questions is, or if the answer to the question is yes, then the system will trigger QRTP related data cleanup messages, display alerts and reminders for QRTP, and enable Title IV claiming features tied to QRTP requirements. So again, the setting and the reason still matter, but only to trigger the appearance of the QRTP question. The actual determination of QRTP status in SSIS comes from the worker's answer to the certification question. All right. This slide highlights an important distinction in how QRTP services are offered and how those services must be entered into SSIS. Minnesota's QRTP certified providers offer various services. Not all are certified as QRTPs. Because of this, workers must verify whether the specific service being accessed by the child or youth is QRTP certified. Just knowing that the provider is certified is not enough. The specific service must be confirmed as QRTP. For example, some QRTP certified providers offer shelter services, but these shelter services may or may not be QRTP certified. When a child or youth receives QRTP services, best practice is for the agency to enter the QRTP placement in SSIS. Under this practice, there may be times when multiple placements will need to be entered in SSIS for a child or youth receiving services with the same provider. When a child or youth is placed at a facility that offers both non-QRTP and QRTP certified services, and the youth accesses both types, SSIS must reflect two separate placement entries. One for the non-QRTP certified service, like shelter, and one for the QRTP certified service. Even if both services are delivered at the same physical location, they must be documented separately in SSIS. This is because the system tracks QRTP status based on the placement record itself. If the QRTP if the QRTP placement is not entered separately, some Title 40 claiming elements for QRTP services might be missed. So to ensure proper federal claiming and compliance with QRTP requirements, it is best practice to verify the service's certification status and create separate SSIS placements when both certified and non-certified services are accessed, even when they are the same provider. All right, and then when all programs and services are QRTP certified within the same residential facility, agencies do not enter separate placements. QRTP requirements are not required to be completed again when moving between QRTP certified programs and services within the same residential facility. When entering the placement into SSIS, select the appropriate setting. Under reason, indicate either treatment for severe emotional disturbance or treatment for developmental disabilities or related conditions. Answer yes to the question, is the BizOrg/provider certified to provide QRTP services? Do not change the placement entry when the child or youth moves QRTP certified programs or services within the same residential facility. The setting and reason remain the same.
All right, we have one question that was just about what we covered. It says entering two placements is way too confusing. Please reiterate with an example to understand this. I have an example to give. So North Holmes Itascan Treatment Center offers a variety of services. Specifically, they offer a shelter program and an evaluation program. Those two programs are not QRTP certified. Itascan has chosen to not certify those programs. So at their Itascan Treatment Center, the only program that is QRTP certified is their residential treatment. So if you have a child that enters Itascan for shelter or evaluation, you are going to enter it as that, shelter and evaluation, and you're going to check no for is the BizOrg QRTP certified. This is because the system goes off of, SSIS goes off of the placement entry to determine whether the QRTP requirements are needed. So then if the child moves from the shelter or evaluation into residential treatment, which is QRTP certified, you would need to enter a second placement, choosing the treatment for developmental disability related condition. And then also check, yes, the BizOrg is QRTP certified. This will then signal to SSIS that this is a QRTP placement, and then all of the QRTP reminders and fields will become accessible in SSIS. We understand that this is confusing. It's confusing for us. It is the way that the system is set up, unfortunately, right now. If you were to have any questions about this as you're currently in a QRTP placement, please feel free to connect with your SSIS mentor, who can contact the SSIS help desk, or you can reach out to us at QRTP operations. I will put both of those emails in the QA in response to that question. And then you'll also have access to those once you get a copy of this PowerPoint. All right, I think I'm up, so I'm just gonna stay unmuted and on camera here. So, all right, moving right along. We are now at the point of the out-of-home placement plan. So the out-of-home placement plan is a child welfare requirement. I'm sure you all know that it's prepared jointly by the parents, guardians, case managers, and the provider, so the QRTP provider, and it must be completed within 30 days of placement. The agency and the parent or guardian must sign the out-of-home placement plan. It is submitted to the court. There is several court oversight and reviews that must be completed for QRTP placements, which we'll cover in a little bit. And the out-of-home placement plan is one of the documents that the agency will submit to the court. Then the out-of-home placement plan is updated at least every 6 months and with any placement change. For QRTP placement, there are several sections within the out-of-home placement plan that must be completed. And now I'll pass it to Nicole, who will talk about those specifically in SSIS.
Okay, so those specific out-of-home placement plan questions that are related to QRTP placement start in the setup tab. So there's a question that says placement is in a QRTP facility. This question must be answered yes for the required QRTP questions to populate into the child or youth's out-of-home placement plan. So the QRTP family and permanency team will populate in the permanency section of the out-of-home placement plan. Workers will need to answer all of the QRTP questions in the out-of-home placement plan. And just a reminder that contacts must be linked to the family and permanency team for the dates and times to appear in the out-of-home placement plan.
Thanks, Nicole. All right, so now we're going to talk about the court oversight that happens. So the first one is the 60-day court approval. So when a child or youth is placed in a QRTP, the court must review and approve or disapprove of the QRTP placement within 60 days. So the 60-day court approval is completed by a juvenile, state, or tribal court. And there's a QRTP placement addendum to the report to the court, lovely name, that you can access both in SSIS and it's an eDoc. The link is right there on the page, which you'll have access to once you get a copy of the slide deck. So as I mentioned, the court must issue this order approving or disapproving of the QRTP placement within 60 days. So for the 60-day court approval, the court is determining whether the needs of the child or youth can be met with the family or in a family foster home, why the QRTP placement provides the child or youth with the most effective and appropriate level of care in the least restrictive environment, and then how the placement is consistent with the short and long-term goals for the child or youth as outlined in the out-of-home placement plan. So if the court issues the order approving the QRTP placement, the child remains in the QRTP. If the court disapproves of the QRTP placement, the child must be moved from the QRTP within 30 days. So it does not matter if the QI recommended QRTP placement, if the family and permanency team was in agreement, if the JTST recommends it, if the court disapproves at that 60-day or by that 60-day mark, the child must be moved within 30 days from the QRTP. Then, if the child or youth remains in the QRTP, and after the courts have issued the 60-day court approval, then ongoing court reviews are required for as long as the child or youth remains in the QRTP. So again, the ongoing court reviews start after the 60-day court approval, and they must occur at every subsequent administrative review, court review, or permanency hearing. Obviously, those are dependent on the type of placement authority that the lead agency has. And in the ongoing court reviews, the court is determining many of the same things that they determined for the 60-day court approval. So whether the child or youth needs can be met through placement in a family foster home, that the QRTP placement provides the most effective and appropriate level of care for the child in the least restrictive environment, how the QRTP placement is consistent with the goals outlined in the out-of-home placement plan, how the child or youth treatment or services are being met in the QRTP, the length of time the county or tribe expects the child to need QRTP placement, and the efforts of the county or tribe to prepare the child or youth for discharge. And then I will pass it to Erica, who will talk about how the court actions are entered into SSIS.
Thanks, Liz. So to enter a court action, you will navigate to the court actions folder, again, under the person node, and you'll select new court actions from the action menu. Just once again, I'd like to point out there is a job aid for QRTP court approval on SSIS, and that's also on the worker documentation page with detailed steps on data entry for court approvals and court actions. First, we'll go through the court hearing tab of the court actions entry. When entering court actions for QRTP placements, you will select juvenile or tribal from the court type drop-down menu list. Then you'll choose the appropriate petition type and filing date. You'll select QRTP placement review in the hearing type field. However, when the hearing type field is completed with something other than a QRTP placement review, but the hearing included the QRTP placement review, workers will select this box to enable that the QRTP review type field is selected. And so that box is disabled when QRTP placement review is selected in the hearing type drop-down menu. But if there's a different hearing type selected, then that box should be checked to include that QRTP placement review. And then lastly, when you're going through the court action, you'll check all the boxes in the order/disposition field that accurately respond with what the court had ordered. Okay, next you'll select the child findings tab. And you'll ensure all of the child findings fields are filled out and accurate, as these are needed to ensure Title IV compliance. You'll click on the QRTP placement approval tab and choose the placement from the drop-down. I apologize. You'll choose the placement from the drop-down that qualifies as a QRTP placement. The information in this drop-down is ordered so that the open placement will appear on top. If the placement hasn't been entered into SSIS when the screen is created, return to this screen when the placement has been entered and select that placement from the drop-down. You will need to select if the QRTP placement was approved or disapproved and the date that the court made that QRTP decision. And I think we'll hold here for questions.
Yes. 2 questions. The first I can answer. This is in regards to the out-of-home placement plan. Can you clarify that when you mentioned agency, do you mean the child welfare agency or the QRTP agency needs to sign the plan? So the parent or guardian and the child welfare agency sign the plan. However, I will note that the QRTP provider facility agency, they should also receive a copy of the out-of-home placement plan and even be involved in the creation of the out-of-home placement plan. Because as a provider, and they are offering services and treatment to the child or youth, that information should be entered into the out-of-home placement plan. And so while the QRTP agency doesn't directly need to sign it, they should definitely be aware of it, have a copy of the completed plan. That would be best practice, and also be involved, like I said, in the creation and completion of it. And then the next question, I don't know if I know the answer to this. I'm not sure if anybody else will. So if we don't, we will definitely give you an email address of where you can send that to get further follow-up. So if we have a child or youth under a CHIPS, and there is a QRTP recommendation, however, they have not yet entered the QRTP, but there is an upcoming hearing. Can that hearing count as a 60-day court approval, even though it will occur before the QRTP placement begins? I'm guessing we're not going to know the answer to that. All right. Given the silence, I'm going to say we're going to follow up on that one. So I will put an email address in for that person who asked the question so you know where to follow up with. And that is all the questions we have so far for this break. All right. So now we're going to talk about the QRTP extended placement review. This is considered one of the last QRTP requirements. And it's not always going to be needed for a QRTP placement. So when a child or youth QRTP placement extends past certain timeframes, which are outlined by the federal government, the director of the county or tribe must complete the extended placement review. We get a lot of questions about the extended placement review. The extended placement review, or the EPR, is what we refer to it as an acronym. It's not completed by the courts. It's completed internally by the county agency, county and tribal agency, and it must be reviewed, completed, and approved by the director. As I mentioned, not all QRTP placements will require an extended placement review. There might be times where a child or youth discharges from the QRTP prior to those timelines that are outlined by the federal government. So if an extended placement review is required, it would be for children and youth who are 13 years of age and older. Their extended placement review is due at 12 consecutive months, which is considered 360 days, or 18 non-consecutive months, which is considered 540 days. And for children that are 12 years of age and under, the extended placement review is completed at 6 consecutive or non-consecutive months, which is considered 180 days. And again, the director of the county or tribal social services agency is responsible for completing the extended placement reviews. The extended placement review determines the child or youth's need for continued placement in the QRTP, and it's also another checks and balance to ensure that children and youth are not remaining in residential settings longer than necessary. If you remember some of the information that Erin first covered at the beginning of this webinar regarding FFPSA, the whole reason FFPSA was implemented, or I shouldn't say whole reason, one of the reasons FFPSA was implemented, and specifically the QRTP requirements, was to prevent children and youth from languishing in residential treatment. And so this extended placement review is really a prime example of that. So the extended placement review is completed and documented in two places. So first, the director must document the extended placement review in the agency's paper or electronic file. There is no template or requirement for what this documentation looks like in the agency's paper or electronic file, other than it must include the director's name, signature, and date. Then the extended placement review is also completed in SSIS on the QRTP extended placement review screen or folder. The director cannot delegate extended placement reviews to other staff, such as the managers or the supervisors. They must be the ones completing and reviewing and approving the extended placement review. All right, now I'm going to pass it to Erica, where she will cover the extended placement review screens in SSIS.
Thanks, Liz. So to enter a new QRTP extended placement review, as Liz previously mentioned, this is also referred to as an EPR. You will navigate to the QRTP extended placement review folder under the permanency folder of the person node. You'll select QRTP extended placement review and select new QRTP extended placement review from the action menu. Once again, the worker documentation page has a very detailed job aid outlining the steps for when and how to enter the QRTP extended placement review. Once the new EPR has been created, you'll be brought to the screen shown in this slide. The review status and continuous placement fields are not editable. A recent change to SSIS has been made with the functionality of the Calculate Review Period Detail button. The Calculate Review Period Detail, or the Calculate Review Period Detail button will automatically populate the age at beginning of review period, review type, review period from and through fields when that button is pressed within 30 days of the EPR's due date. Data will not calculate if the button is pressed prior to 30 days before the EPR is due. So once the EPR is calculated, all necessary information should be entered into the text field as well. When all of that information is entered appropriately, the worker will then send for approval by selecting Send for Approval from the action menu. The director of the county agency or initiative tribe is solely responsible for reviewing and approving QRTP EPRs. Although directors must be the individual to approve the EPR, the director can designate someone from their agency to enter that approval or denial into SSIS on their behalf. This individual must have the approved QRTP extended placement function assigned to their role. You are encouraged to reach out to your agency mentor to ensure that this function is added to the appropriate role in SSIS admin if necessary. The agency director or individual entering on behalf of the director will navigate to searches and logs and select approval log to review the QRTP EPRs that are awaiting agency approval. So all of those EPRs that are awaiting agency approval will appear under the QRTP extended placement review subfolder, which is again under the approvals folder. So the agency's director or the individual entering the approval into SSIS on behalf of the director will check the confirmation of the review checkbox to serve as an electronic signature when approving the review. And once that checkbox is checked, the director or individual entering on behalf of the director will select the director's decision from the action menu. So either approve, send for clarification, deny, reset to draft, or withdraw.
All right, I'm not seeing any questions from that section. We will have one more pause for questions, so I think we can keep moving.
Thanks, Liz. One note just about upcoming considerations and process automation before Mary jumps on and talks a little bit about requesting QIs and QI programs. We are currently developing, we DCYF and in partnership with our technology folks are developing an automated process for QRTP documentation. So the QRTP assessment documents will be available in SSIS for agencies. So again, we're working on this process, but we're hoping and we're excited that these documents will now be available, or in the future will be available in SSIS for agencies. We'll continue to keep folks updated about that as we move forward. But we're excited that that'll be sort of a good place for folks to access those documents as they're being completed by qualified individuals. So more to come on that. As we move forward, we'll certainly keep folks updated about the automation process. And now I'm going to hand it over to Mary to talk a little bit about QI programs, QIs, and requesting QIs.
Great, thanks, Erin. So in Minnesota, there are 3 types of QI programs. These include county and tribal contracted, waivered, and state contracted. The state contracted and agency contracted programs contract directly with individuals or agencies in the community who are not employed by or affiliated with counties, tribes, or residential facilities. Waivered QI programs can use certain county or tribal employees as QIs, which I'll discuss on the next slide. Upon the implementation of FFPSA, Minnesota applied to the Federal Children's Bureau to allow certain county and tribal employees to become QIs. The waivers fall into 2 types. The first, waiver 1, allows a designated employee who is outside of the child and welfare line of supervision to be a QI. That may be a public health employee, a sheriff's office employee, or even agency janitorial services employee. As long as they are outside the child welfare system and are not supervised by someone in child welfare, they could possibly qualify to be a waiver 1 QI. The second waiver, waiver 2, requires a regional collaborative agreement among local agencies. This waiver allows child welfare employees to be QIs outside of their agency of employment. So let's say a QI works for County A, and counties A, B, and C have developed a collaborative agreement for QIs. That QI that works for County A can provide assessments to counties B and C, but not A. Similarly, a QI working for County B can only provide assessments to counties A and C. If you think your agency might like to have a waiver QI, you can see the link about information about developing a waiver QI program at the local level. Oh, there's waivered and QI, waivered and agency contracted QIs bring local knowledge. They know the area, the cultural values, the resources in town, which is a huge advantage over state contracted QIs who provide assessments in every nook and cranny in Minnesota. This broad coverage is essential so local agencies can continue to meet the federal requirements of FFPSA. However, it is impossible for anyone to know all the particulars of every community in all of Minnesota. While we believe that waivered and agency contracted QIs provide a more tailored assessments, these agencies can still use the state contracted QI program as a backup when their local QI is unavailable or has a conflict of interest.
And Mary has a phenomenal map in here showing where our waivered and contracted QIs are. But unfortunately, it's not showing on the PowerPoint today, but it should be available in our PowerPoint slides once we post them.
Yes.
Sorry about that, Mary.
No worries, no worries. It just, the map shows all the counties in Minnesota that have, that currently have waivered and or agency contracted QIs. If you are thinking about having a local QI for your agency, please reach out. We'll help you identify the type of program best suited for your agency's needs. whichever model you're using, there are supports for that QI. The state hosts community of practice meetings for all QIs, regardless of their type, to offer training, support, and consultation. There's also a practice guide that outlines what QI should be doing from assignment to assessment completion. We also offer peer-to-peer consultation and technical and policy support from DCYF staff. Because QIs work in isolation to maintain objectivity in their assessments, we try to foster a QI community that values independence, but also the importance of gathering together about the work. So how do you actually request a QI? If you have a local QI, you're going to use your agency's process to request a QI. If you're using a state contracted QI, on the other hand, this process is outlined on the next couple of slides. Regardless of QI type, case managers need to gather specific documents to give the QI. That would be the assessment referral form, the family and permanency team member list, including their contact information, and the level of care determination. As soon as there is a crisis placement or when the JTST team recommends QRTP placement, make the request. The sooner a QI gets the assignment, the likelier you are to meet those federally prescribed timelines. If you're using a state contracted QI, it's pretty simple and straightforward. You fill out the electronic request form, hit submit, and then you'll get a confirmation email. The email also contains a PDF of your completed request form. Once we get your request form, we'll work to find a QI that can take your request. We'll also send an email confirming that we received your request. So you'll get the automated confirmation as well as one from us. And just a reminder, no identifying information on the form, please. There's no need for us. All the information that will identify that youth is going to be between you and the QI. So when you're requesting a state contract QI, this is the information we need included on the request form. The date the JTST met, their recommendation and confirmation that they followed all the steps. If you already know the facility and admission date, include that information. If you don't, that's okay. Maybe you've made referrals, but the youth hasn't been accepted yet. Or maybe the youth has been accepted to a facility, but you've only been given the admission date of mid-October. You can include this information as well, as that helps us kind of prioritize some of those requests coming in to us. You'll also add information about the youth's American Indian heritage, their current placement, and in the case of an out-of-state placement, confirmation that these requirements have been met. If you have any specific requests, like a culturally specific QI, please note that on the form too. And then finally, at the end, you'll enter your contact information. And we'll pause here for questions.
Yeah, we have one question, Mary. Is there a list of current QIs and counties and how to reach them?
You know, that is not a list that we share publicly because the QIs are designated for a specific county or the state. It's important that, you know, we kind of hold that, but you are able to reach out to other counties who might have a QI. If you are maybe in your region, you can reach out to counties to see if they have one, and then they can give you that contact information if the QI is open to that.
Thanks, Mary. Those are all the questions so far.
Super. All right. So I just wanted to review a few best practices that we've discussed today. First, always double check facilities in the DHS licensing information lookup to make sure that they're QRTP certified. Remember that some facilities have multiple programs and not all the programs that are under a facility's oversight are necessarily QRTP certified. Second, make sure you're communicating with the facility about the child services. Don't assume that you know what they provide. Third, keep FFPSA's intent in mind, reducing the use of congregate care, placing the child in the least restrictive setting, and limiting residential stays to what's truly necessary. And finally, don't hesitate to use the resources and reach out for help. So here are your key contacts for QI program questions for Title E, 4E, foster care licensing, or SSIS help. We've listed each email in that slide. It's worth, saving those emails because these are the people who can help troubleshoot and consult with you on your case. Beyond the emails, there's a whole set of online resources, practice guides, flowcharts, court information. Everything you need is linked right here on this slide. So if you're ever unsure, these are really great starting points. As Erica mentioned earlier, you also have access to SSIS quick learning tools, which include micro trainings and job aids for each step in the process. For example, how to enter the placement setting and reason codes, how to enter the family and permanency team, information about the QI assessment, court approvals, and extended placement reviews. You can find them all on the SSIS worker documentation website. And for the legal folks in the room, here are the statutes and federal guidance that give us the framework, that is FFPSA, Minnesota Statutes 260C, plus the Federal Bipartisan Budget Act and guidance from the Children's Bureau. This slide is mostly for reference, but it's here if you need the actual statutorial and legal language. So that wraps up our webinar. We can pause for questions. I think I saw maybe one or two come in.
Yeah, we had one that said, how will a county know if they have a QI? And so I provided the QRTP operations team email. You can contact them, and if the county has a QI, they will provide you with the point of contact. Then we had one last question come in. Can you explain why a PRTF does not fall in the category of QRTP? And I can address that. We've gotten that question a couple of times in some other webinars that we've given. So a PRTF stands for a psychiatric residential treatment facility. This facility is considered inpatient, an inpatient level of care. So it's an inpatient setting that's offered in a residential setting rather than in a hospital. And so that would be a higher level of care than a QRTP. And so the QRTP requirements that we have covered today only apply, obviously, to QRTP placements. There are other types of requirements that must be met in order for a person to access a PRTF. For example, there has to be a medical necessity determination made. But again, the PRTF is sort of that high level of inpatient care. You could get that at a hospital or in a residential setting, such as the PRTF. And a QRTP would be considered a step down from a PRTF. And so thus those QRTP requirements are just specific to our QRTP providers in Minnesota. I hope that answers the question. If not, I will also provide our email to that question, and we can connect you with the PRTF policy team at DHS, who also fields a lot of questions like that. And I believe that was our last question. So I'm thinking that us panelists could stay on just for a couple minutes longer to make sure none others come in, but otherwise we're giving you back over 30 minutes of your time. So we appreciate you sticking with us. Again, we will get the webinar recording and the slide deck posted in the coming weeks. In the same place where you registered for this training. And again, then once you have the slide deck, you'll have access to all of those clickable links and email addresses as well. All right, I got one more question. What if the family reports they do not have supports or anyone for the permanency team?
I think we've definitely heard from QIs that sometimes lists are longer or shorter. depending on, the circumstances of what's going on with the youth and that sort of thing. We would be happy to brainstorm with folks about some potential ideas about that. Another thing, again, that's a good best practice is obviously to talk to any family members, talk to the youth about who might consist of that team and really recommend, anyone who would be appropriate in that regard. So it can be difficult depending on the case, but we're certainly happy to brainstorm with folks and encourage you to talk with the youth and the family about who they might recommend for those teams as well.
Another question, if a child is in a QRTP and leaves to go to a hospital, then is readmitted to the QRTP, how is the placement time counted? That might be one you'll need to email us about. I was gonna see if anybody else has comments on there.
Yeah, I think that might be one best to send to us, Liz. There's a lot of pieces that can kind of go into that, the length of stay and some of those sorts of things. So if you guys have specific cases or circumstances, we'd encourage you to email those directly to us. It'd be best way to give guidance is specific to that case.
All right, that looks like all of the questions. So we are going to stop the recording and end this webinar. Thank you all again.